Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer by tackling a struggle pretty much all of us face. Whether it's putting off that looming performance review, delaying a massive term paper, or, just sitting there staring at a blank screen instead of writing one scary email, I really want to validate exactly what's happening in your brain right now. We're going to unpack the actual hard neuroscience behind why we put things off. So, are you just lazy? You might feel incredibly guilty sitting there at your desk, dodging the one single task you know you need to do. But I'm here to completely shatter the myth that laziness is your problem. Honestly, by any measure, you're likely a highly driven person capable of real sustained effort. So, why on earth are you paralyzed? Well, here is the undeniable truth. Putting things off is actually a biological failure to process negative emotions. It is absolutely not a time management issue. The neuroscience shows us that procrastination isn't really about the task itself, right? It's entirely about managing the discomfort or the boredom or the anxiety that the specific task generates. Let's get right into section 1, the amygdala hijack. Inside your skull, there is this wildly unfair fight going on. On one side, you've got your amygdala. That's this tiny, ancient threat detector that operates incredibly fast and strictly values the now. On the other side, you have your prefrontal cortex. That's the slow, logical center where your long-term planning lives, valuing the later. To your fast-acting amygdala, an intimidating spreadsheet registers the exact same way as a saber-toothed tiger jumping out of the bushes. Meanwhile, your logical prefrontal cortex, it's just way too slow to stop the panic. And this is what we call an amygdala hijack. The defining factor here is simply timing. The amygdala sounds the alarm so fast and so loudly that your brain literally forces you to avoid the task just to regulate your discomfort before reason even has a chance to kick in. You don't consciously decide to procrastinate. Your amygdala decides for you in milliseconds, basically taking your rational prefrontal cortex entirely offline.
Okay, moving to section 2, the perfectionism habit loop.
So there's a massive misconception out there that we really need to clear up. You do not procrastinate because you have high standards. Those are called perfectionistic strivings. They're driven by aspiration, and they actually help you work and decrease procrastination. You procrastinate because of perfectionistic concerns, meaning the intense, totally paralyzing fear of failing to meet those impossible standards. And this creates a really toxic habit loop. When you face a task with stakes, that's your trigger. Your resulting behavior is to delay. Why? Well, because not starting is actually the reward. I know, it sounds crazy, but as long as you delay, you get this rush of temporary relief. You haven't failed yet. Not starting becomes a neurological reward because it preserves your self-image. You get to keep the comfortable fantasy that you could have done it perfectly, if you just had the time. And this biological trap? It's getting so much worse. We've seen a staggering 5-fold increase in chronic procrastination just since the 1970s. Think about that. We jumped from about 5% of the population identifying as chronic procrastinators to nearly 25% today. That is wild. So why this sudden huge spike? Mostly because our modern environment is practically engineered against us. Your brain is desperately looking for a way out of the emotional friction caused by the amygdala. And today, it has endless dopamine-driven traps to choose from. We're talking infinite scroll, nonstop notifications, variable reward schedules, 500-channel TVs, the constant hunt for social validation. These things actively exploit our ancient wiring and offer immediate, effortless emotional relief right at the exact second the amygdala starts panicking.
All right, let's look at section 3, future you is a stranger.
Because human brains evolved in this incredibly uncertain world, where surviving today mattered way more than thriving next week. We are biologically programmed to choose instant gratification over long-term success. It's just how we're built. The further away a reward is, the less your brain actually cares about it. This is a concept called temporal discounting, and it fundamentally changes how we view deadlines. Behind this temporal discounting is an actual neurological tug-of-war in your head. Your ventral medial prefrontal cortex is screaming for immediate mood repair right now. Meanwhile, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is desperately trying to keep you focused on future outcomes and long-term planning. But when a task feels emotionally aversive, the instant gratification center easily overpowers the long-term planning center, every time. And this leads to an absolutely wild phenomenon. When you put off a hard task, you genuinely aren't making yourself do it later. Neurologically speaking, your brain processes your future self using the exact same neural patterns it uses to think about a complete stranger.
Basically, your brain is more than happy to throw future you under the bus, because as far as our neurons are concerned, hey, that's some stranger's problem, not mine. Which brings us to Section 4, the science of self-control and anxiety.
When we look at the data on how we actually cope with this, a very clear pattern emerges. Naturally, as self-control increases, academic procrastination plummets. But the really interesting part is looking at the people who have high psychological resilience. They have this amazing protective buffer. It's like an extra layer of defense against putting things off, which allows them to regulate their negative emotions even when their willpower is completely depleted.
Now, on the exact flip side of procrastination is a lesser known but honestly equally problematic behavior called precrastination. This is when some people rush to finish tasks way, way too early. They grab the low-hanging fruit instantly, just to get rid of the cognitive load. But recognize that this is still a failure to regulate anxiety. It's just another way to stop worrying about aversive tasks, and it often leads to wasted effort, premature optimization, and, frankly, terrible decisions.
Okay, finally, Section 5, rewiring your brain.
Now that we actually understand the mechanism here, it is time to take control back. First step, you have to shrink the amygdala response. See, the amygdala fires the absolute hardest when a task feels massive or overly ambiguous. But by breaking a huge project down into tiny, concrete steps, you dramatically lower the emotional stakes. This physically stops the amygdala from perceiving the task as a massive threat, which vastly reduces the friction in your brain.
And to actually implement this, you have to remove all the ambiguity. You do this through what researchers call implementation intentions. So instead of saying, oh, I'll study later, you decide exactly when, where, and what you're going to do. By planning the exact time and place, you drastically lower the limbic friction in your brain. You don't even have to debate with yourself anymore. The decision is already made. Next, you need a replacement behavior for your avoidance. Dr. Judd calls this the bigger, better offer, and it comes in the form of curiosity. Instead of just white-knuckling your way through the fear, try getting genuinely curious about the physical friction you're feeling in your body. Or try to find just one tiny, fascinating aspect of the work itself. Doing this updates your brain's reward values and actively disarms that nasty perfectionism loop we talked about.
Another incredibly powerful technique is temptation bundling. Because we know your brain heavily discounts future rewards, you can actually hack your own dopamine system by bringing a reward right into the present moment. Pair an aversive task you dread, like doing chores or going for a run, with a guaranteed guilty pleasure, like listening to a favorite explainer, just like this one. This makes the dreaded task immediately rewarding to your ventromedial prefrontal cortex.
Finally, and this is absolutely crucial, you have to practice self-forgiveness. Drop the shame. Calling yourself lazy creates shame. And from a purely neurological standpoint, shame is a massive amygdala trigger. It just adds this thick layer of negative emotion that only restarts the procrastination cycle all over again. Dropping the shame is what gives your prefrontal cortex a fighting chance.
Because at the end of the day, you are not broken. You just have a brain that evolved to prioritize immediate comfort. So I want to leave you with this thought. The very next time you feel that familiar, nagging urge to run from a task, what might actually happen if you simply pause, observe the friction without any judgment, and choose to lean in?